All right, thank you everyone for coming here today and for participating in the Festival of the Book. We have a wonderful couple of panelists for two really great books that I've had the privilege of being able to read, and I'm so excited to hear them talk about it. I'm Alex Intron. I am a member of the Latinx Book Club, started in 2020. It is a statewide book club in which folks, we get together, we read primarily Latinx literature, discuss it, and have a good time. I would also like to remind folks that if you have cell phones, please silence them. Put them on vibrate so it doesn't disturb the conversation that we have today. Look for the exits. You pretty much entered through them, so if you got in, you can get out. Of course, thank you to the sponsors, to the folks who made sure that this was possible. This is a wonderful event where folks are able to engage with authors and their works, and that is important, especially in a time where reading and books are being challenged, and it's very important to be able to engage with authors. So, with that said, we have Andrea Beatriz Arango, who is the Newbery Honor Award-winning author of Ibelis Explains It All. She was born and raised in Puerto Rico and is a former public school teacher with almost a decade of teaching experience. And next to her is Medina, who is of Cuban descent and the author of Mercy Suarez Plays It Cool. She is also the 2023 to 2024 National Ambassador of Young People's Literature and is the recipient of the 2019 John Newbery Medal for Mercy Suarez Changes Gears. So I would love for you all to go ahead and give them a warm welcome. So we'll go ahead and start. Can you tell us both about your books and what went into writing it and what brought you to publishing it? Let's start with Andrea.
Hi, my name is Andrea and I wrote Ibelis Explains It All. If you're not familiar with the book, it's about a 12-year-old girl whose grandma moves in with the family. Her grandma has Alzheimer's, and so her mom thinks that might be like a tricky transition for her. But actually what ends up being more of a conflict is that Ibelis goes to therapy regularly, she takes medication, and her grandma doesn't really understand why that is necessary. So it's a book about learning to speak up for what you need, even if that means having difficult conversations with your family or friends or people who love you but don't necessarily know how to support you. And I wrote this book while teaching virtually at the beginning of the pandemic. It was a chaotic time in teaching. When the schools first closed down, none of us knew what we were doing. So students had a lot of free time on their hands, teachers had a lot of free time on their hands, and so that's when I wrote the bulk of it. And I was lucky enough later in 2020 to be able to get an agent, and then in 2021 to get a book deal.
Now I'm going to plug her book. So it was one of my favorite reads of last year, and it's a wonderful book to read this month because it's Poetry Month coming up in April, and it's a novel in verse.
I forgot to say that.
I absolutely want to just congratulate you for a Newbery honor. It's completely deserved. So this is Mercy Suarez Plays It Cool, which is the last book in an accidental trilogy that began with a book called Mercy Suarez Changes Gears. It features Mercy, who in the first book was in the 6th grade and navigating the bananas world of middle school, as you know, right? All the things that happened to you. Well, think about it, who you were in the 6th grade and who you were in the 8th grade. It's a lot. So she's navigating that and also figuring out the social scene, how to advocate for herself, how to deal with people who are difficult, how to deal with herself when she is difficult. And she also discovers a secret in her family, which is that her grandfather is entering the later stages of Alzheimer's, something that hasn't been shared with her until that point. So that was Mercedes Suarez Changes Gears, and then there was Mercedes Suarez Can't Dance when she's in the 7th grade, and she runs the school store with one Wilson, and learns all about love. And this book is her in the 8th grade, where I had to bring all of those storylines in for Elaine. The relationship with her grandfather's illness, concluding 8th grade, and really who she wants to be as she moves on into high school. And how I wrote it is just that it was due. And it was the next thing that I had promised to do.
So both of your main characters navigate very different family dynamics. One has a very large family network surrounding them in South Florida, and the other one is a tighter family, a single mother household at the time, with a grandmother coming from Puerto Rico in Baltimore. So my question would be, what life experiences brought you to bringing these characters to life in the way that you did?
Well, I grew up in Puerto Rico, very close with all of my family. It's a very small island, so I saw my entire extended family all the time. And so I knew I wanted to include in the book family, outside of just parents or siblings. But then also in teaching, I taught in Puerto Rico, but then I taught here in Albemarle County and in Charlottesville City Schools. And if you live in this area, you know that a lot of our students, especially our English language learners, which is who I taught, live in homes that include multiple family members. Almost all of my students had a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or cousins living with them. And so I did want to showcase that in books because I think those sort of non-traditional family units deserve a little more representation. And as far as like caring for grandma, my grandma did have Alzheimer's in Puerto Rico, and all of us adults kind of took turns caregiving, staying over at her house so that she could remain in her house. And so that played into it a lot as well, just that sensation of living with grandma and not having her be exactly the way she used to be.
And in my case, I would say, so my family background is Cuban, and I also grew up with a very different interpretation of family, right? It's not parents and children, it's aunts and uncles and all the things. That's la familia. And they all weigh in equally. They boss you around equally, they interfere equally, like there's no boundary, right? And so I wanted to capture that in its beauty and in the moments where it doesn't work well for children. Because you asked our personal experience, right? Okay, so I grew up more like Beatriz did. I grew up, my father and my mother divorced shortly before I was born. My mother had just arrived in this country from Cuba. They arrived separately. My father came first, then my mother, and then my sister, and then I was born here. And during those separations, my father fell in love with someone else. That's the short answer. And I was born in June, and my dad left in March. And my mother was very pregnant and did not have family members here, except for a cousin named Nena Fernandez, who lived in Queens, New York, who got on a Greyhound bus and picked my mother up. And they did a garage sale, and that's how I ended up in Flushing, Queens. So, long story short. So, I knew a lot of love when Diaz came and Theo and mi abuelo and all of that. I also knew a lot of trauma in the family. The trauma of losing a country and your identity and your language, not knowing, you know, New York City, like how do you raise children in this, right? Like all of those things. And those two things existed side by side, right? Like enormous love and enormous emotional strain and economic strain. And my mother's dream was to live in Florida in houses where her family could all be attached. So when I drew Las Casitas, which is where Mercy lives, in La Florida, right? They live like my mother's cousins, right? The 3 little houses all interconnected. And I wrote a family that was functioning. And I wrote into the space of love for them. Because I think sometimes we write, especially for Latino families, we tend to write the spaces of pain and hardship, which are legitimate things to write about, but they're not the only things we know. And so that's, I guess I was writing for maybe the pieces of my life that I knew, loved, and the pieces that I longed for. And they sort of merged in Mercy.
It's a beautiful answer. So both of your characters struggle with fitting in and managing friendships in different degrees. You know, it's reading. I felt middle school Alex, you know, struggling and getting angry, and then being like, why would you yell at this person, or why are you so nervous about this? Just talk to them. But you know, when you're in middle school, you're not thinking rationally. You're thinking as a kid. So, with that being said, Andrea, why did you choose to make mental health such a prominent theme in your book?
I definitely think that mental health needs to be talked about more. I think we're getting to a place as people where we're pretty comfortable talking about like adults needing therapy and it not being a negative thing, but not so much kids. And you know, in my classroom, I know that I had kids who went to therapy and who took medication for various things, but they never talked about it. You know, they didn't talk about it with their friends, they didn't talk about it with their teachers. There's still, I think, quite a bit of stigma surrounding that. And every time that I've done a school visit or anything like that, I always have at least one kid who comes up to me and says like, oh my gosh, like I take pills too. You know, and they say it in that like hushed voice, like they're telling me the secret, and I don't want it to feel that way. So I did want to write a book where that is very normalized and it's not a negative thing at all. And I also, in speaking about friendships, you know, I think especially with the pandemic, kids do struggle to know how to communicate with each other, especially after all the years of like virtualness. And so I really wanted to model in the book what good friendships can look like and what healthy communication can look like. Like Ivelisa's not a great friend in the book, but she realizes when she's doing things that could be better a different way, and she learns to apologize, and she learns to have communication with her friends about what is bothering her, what she needs, what she wants. And so that was really important for me to show too, because I think sometimes when we look at the media that's out there, there's a lot, you're right, of like middle school angst and people fighting and friendships breaking up, and we don't see as much the like putting back together and how we can have healthy talks about what good friendships can look like. So I really did try to show that in my book. It's okay to not be a good friend all the time. But here are some resources about maybe how you can have those conversations with your friends and apologize if you did something wrong.
What's his name again, the boy?
Amir.
Yes, I loved Amir.
I loved him too. He's such a sweet friend to me.
He reminds me of Wilson in my second book, like the good upstanding kids, like, thank you for being that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that's what I wanted to show. Like, he's such a great friend to her, but even him at one point is like, listen, this has to be like a give and take, you know? Like, you need to be giving me something back too. And so I really did want to share that because I feel like that happens in middle school a lot. You know, I've fostered quite a few teenagers, and so I don't have children of my own, but I've had teenagers living with me, and you know, they would come home and be like, I'm never talking to this person again. And it would be over like the tiniest thing, and they just didn't know how to make up. So, just trying to showcase that.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, I'm here. Yeah, so I think one of Medici's great dramas in the series is Edna Santos, right? So we all have an Edna Santos. We've all got one of those people, right? And in the first iteration of Edna, right, in the 6th grade, you basically want to strangle this girl, right? She says mean things, she puts herself ahead of everybody, she's just horrible. And, right, there's an internal life to Edna too, right? So how to draw her over the course of the book, and to have each one of these girls be able to see one another a little better without tying it up neatly. Like, they do not go off into the sunset as the best of friends. But with time, they learn to navigate each other's stuff, right? And they start to see some common ground and figure out how to just share the space of school and classroom life together. So that's the piece, I think, you know, the friendship piece. And the other thing I was really exploring was the dynamic of girl friendships, like when there's many girls involved, you know, 2, or then there's 3, and then but there's never really 3. There's always 2, and one who's mad, and like this thing that keeps going on, and how we do that. And in this last book, for kids in the 8th grade, maybe you can weigh in on this, but the notion of figuring out how to belong to more than one group of people, right? Because we all contain multitudes, right? We're all many things. So you can belong to different groups, but in middle school, there's
how do you balance your loyalties?
Yeah, and figuring out that you can be crossed over into lots of different identities and still be yourself. So that's what I was trying to unpack in the
I think one of the, I was reading Humanities Explains It All. I'm, consistently frustrated with Edith. But I truly appreciate one of, just thematically the idea that, like you said, it is okay not to be okay. This conversation about mental health, particularly for children. And at the end of it, there are resources provided, real resources that you could, point to. And I'm just imagining a middle schooler reading this and being able to, see themselves in it in some way and be able to have those resources shown to them. Because, as much as Google does exist, right, sometimes people don't know how to ask the question properly. And one of the cool things about Mercy's, the entire story is that there's so much grace in being able to come to terms that you can have tiers of friends, right? Like you can have different relationships with different people. You don't have to be best friends with the cool girl in school, and you don't have to be best friends with the person in your group who can have a negative attitude. But the fact that she's in a guidance counselors, she's kind of an assistant there, and she's able to see that other people go through things themselves. That gives her a perspective that I thought, is great. That if someone's reading this, it's great to be able to get that out of that. Now, Alzheimer's features heavily in both of your books. I was surprised. I saw as reading Beatriz plays it cool. Lolo gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and she has to deal with it. And so I wanted to know, Meg, what went into not only trying to visualize and write how your main character had to deal with that devastating news and also cope with it as a middle schooler. But how did you also write that from the perspective of multiple family members, extended family members?
Yeah. So, Diego, my cousin, my uncle by marriage, he was a lovely man. He passed away from complications, eventually from Alzheimer's. And I got to see my cousin Dee and his wife and 2 daughters sort of deal with the disappearance of Diego, so to speak. So I had seen the illness transpire. As I was writing this series, though, my mother died in 2013, and my aunt, the Aisa, who I wrote a picture book about many years ago, she died in 2020 in COVID in a nursing facility in the worst possible way. So part of watching them go and having them live with me during that time of their life was an enormous honor to help somebody cross to the other side, to help someone let go and find forgiveness and find peace and understanding. Like that was very important for my mother and me to be able to do together, because we fought so much. We were such different women. So as her cancer extended, and the same thing happened with Isa in 2020, as illness took them, they forgot details of our life, or me, or they just weren't the person, right? They weren't the person, and you could see them going away. So I called on all of that, I think, all those feelings of frustration, that you want that person to remain the person they were for you, which is unreasonable, and yet you feel those things. The impact that it had on my children who were in high school when my mother was sickest, and how they felt about sharing a house with elderly ill folks, or walking, around wheelchairs and commodes and, all the things. And just loss, I think. I just thought about loss and how it looks different for each of the family members, even as they're all pulling together to try to make this okay. That's I think, how I wrote it. How about you? Because you did a great job with Abuela, the grandmother, in that piece.
Yeah, I think Alzheimer's is one of those things that every person experiences a little bit differently, but there are definitely some commonalities that kind of everyone who's ever had a loved one who has Alzheimer's will probably recognize in the book. And so I did draw on a lot of my own experiences with my grandma. I specifically chose to make her be still in like the earlier stages of it, because I do think Alzheimer's just gets very sad. And I didn't want it to be that sad. So it is in the earlier stages. More so, Eva's grandmother is constantly like forgetting things, or she sees people who are not there, which is one of those things that it's like funny in hindsight, but like my grandma used to do that. And I remember one time because I was teaching in Puerto Rico, and I would go over after school to keep her company. And I remember one time I came out of the bathroom, and my grandfather had passed away a number of years ago. And my grandmother said, "Hey, did your grandfather find you?" And I just stopped, and I was like, "No." She's like, "He's looking for you, you better go get him." And it's one of those moments where I was like, did she see a ghost? Is he here? Should I go look for him? Because in the moment I'm like, and so there's a little bit of that in the book, so some of those moments that can be quite light or quite sad, depending on how you're looking at them. You know, having to lock doors at night as a safety precaution. You know, we had to do that with my grandmother because she would get up in the middle of the night and forget where she was, and one time she left the house and tripped over a step that she's never tripped on, that has always been there, you know, and she hurt herself. And so we had to start, you know, it's that weird, like, I don't want to lock someone in their own house, but, you know, sometimes you do have to do that. So little things like that, I think people who have had family members go through that will recognize. But yeah, mostly I drew on that. And, you know, I think Mercy Suarez was the first middle grade book I ever read, actually, that had Alzheimer's representation. So yeah, it's nice to now that there's more books about it now, I think, because it's such a common disease and so many kids and adults know someone who has had it. So I'm glad that there's more kids books that incorporate it.
Can I ask for something? So this has happened to me, and I'm wondering if this is happening to you. So I'll do a signing somewhere, and I've had moms come up with their child. I had a librarian, and this is one really memorable, and they put Mercy Suarez down, and they said, yeah, you just a signature. And I'm signing, and then they say, my father died of Alzheimer's. And I looked up, and it was the person just released all the things there. And that happens so often with kids. With one mother-daughter team said they read it together because the grandfather was, and the little girl didn't feel strong enough to read it by herself, so her mom said, let's read it together. So there's something in it, even though it's hard to write those scenes, like, yeah, there are some moments where you're like, you're almost not afraid to write it for children, but you know it's because it's difficult and it's going to pierce them. It's hard. It's a hard day as a writer to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, you know, when you write a book, right? You know, everybody has seen those like little blurbs. You know, that other authors will like read your book, and that actually happened to me. Lisa Phipps, who wrote Starfish, she's one of the authors who blurbed my book, and after she read it, she actually called me, and she said, you know, like, I really felt that because I was my mom's caregiver, you know, and she's like, and I could tell, she was like, I just wanted to talk to you because I could tell that the way you wrote it, you had truly experienced this, you know, and I agree with you, there's something about it that's just very recognizable to people.
So, Elise, when she's, you know, when she is, when her grandmother does come, and we do have, our character is, you know, she's taking medication to account for what amounts to PTSD, and she's struggling with it, and when the grandmother comes, she's also struggling with Alzheimer's. And there is kind of a conversation or an exchange where the grandmother, which I feel is, reading this, I feel it is the most Latinx thing, but also perhaps a very new American thing, right? Folks who, you know, immigrate to the States or who come to the States with a different culture, a different background, different mentality. Grandmother's like, you don't take medication, or you're not proud of it, right? We don't do that. And reading this, you see we have a young character, a very, you know, a middle schooler in today's day and age, who probably has grown up with a different conception of medication and mental health. But they're coming at it with each other. And I wanted to know, this is very much a thing in Latinidad where you have a conflict or a tension between older generations and younger generations. So I wanted to know what went into describing that in the book and you know, what precisely, who were you thinking about when you were writing that?
Yeah, you know, and I don't think it's just Latinx families. I think just in general, like I do think it is a generational thing where, you know, more things are normalized now. But yeah, I was thinking about my own family and the families of my students and just families I know where, you know, it's always like, why are you going to therapy? Like, you're not crazy. Like, why are you taking pills? Like, you're just putting drugs in your system, you know? And there's a conversation, so Ibelisa's therapist actually is the one who tells her, like, do you think your grandma would take medicine for her Alzheimer's? And Ibelisa's like, yeah, of course she would. You know, and it's that realization that, like, we sometimes find it easier to think about medication as valuable for physical ailments or illnesses, and not so much for things going on in our brain. And so I wanted to showcase that, especially because I don't think there's ever any doubt in the book that Ibelisa's grandmother loves her very, very much. Like, there is never a doubt of that. And so I really wanted to showcase that relationship where Ibeliz has someone in her life who supports her in so many things, who gives her all of this affection that she desperately craves, who she loves very, very much, but doesn't understand this, like, key part of her wellness and her day-to-day, and how those conversations between them progress to the point where her grandmother starts to really understand. Because I do think that, you know, not just kids, but I feel like everyone is afraid to have those conversations, you know, when family members disagree with you about something that you feel is very core to your well-being. It's hard to have those conversations about whatever the topic may be. And so I just wanted to show how those conversations can be done with love, and how, you know, if people truly love you and support you, you know, they will listen to what you have to say. And so it is tumultuous, but ultimately they do come to an agreement. So yeah, I just wanted to show that, because I think it is very common in families of all backgrounds and ethnicities. Yeah.
You know, what I want to add to that is that as I was reading your book, I was thinking that what is good for Ibeliz and what is good for Abuela are sometimes at cross purposes, right? And what Ibeliz needed to protect her, all that she's going through, right, was directly in conflict with taking care of Abuela. And I think that happens in the Medici novels and to a small extent, but the notion of these really hard moments in families when you're trying to figure out whose needs are going to get met when they all have to be met at the same time, right? And it's so imperfect. And that's the dynamic that is really tense and that gives us so much guilt when we get it wrong, etc.
So just as a heads up, I will, you know, allow the audience to ask some questions. So start thinking some questions in a few moments. Oh, well, go ahead.
I would love to know what you would want to say to a middle schooler who aspires to be a writer. And I would love to know anything you want to share about what lies ahead for you in your creative process.
Thank you.
I would definitely say to keep writing and practice your writing. I definitely wrote all through elementary school and middle school and high school. I never thought it could actually be a career for me. Like, it just seems like people ask me now what I do, and I always like hesitate because it sounds so weird to say I'm an author. But I've always been an author, and I've always written. And kids have such good stories to tell. Right now I'm mentoring through the Girls Right Now program, which definitely, if you know any, this is for high school, but if you know any high schoolers who love to write, It is a fantastic mentorship program. It's virtual. It's Girls Write Now, but like with a W, like write, and they get paired with authors or writers in different fields. You know, so if you are into journalism or like advertising or podcasting or anything like that. And these kids are great at writing. So I think, yeah, just keep writing and putting it out there and seek out opportunities to share your writing with people. I think publishing as an industry is trying to get better every day. It is a hard industry to get into, but everybody's story deserves to be told. So definitely encourage anyone who, if you love writing, then keep doing it for sure.
But what's next?
What's next? I have another book coming out in September. It's called Something Like Home, and it's about a Puerto Rican girl who moves in with her aunt while her parents are in rehab, and she finds a dog, a little pit bull puppy, and she is training him to be a therapy dog. It's also in verse. She is a little bit younger than Imelda, so she's in 6th grade, and I would say it's a little bit lighter in tone. It's still a little sad, but it's not as sad. So that's up next, and just working on more middle grades. I love middle schoolers. It was my favorite type of teaching to do was in middle school. So definitely working on some more middle grades.
I'm signing up for that one. So my advice is that and to read really extensively, like range, you know, read all the things that you like, all the things that you don't know a thing about, you know, in genres, all of it. I think that it gives kids more tools in their toolbox, just more examples. And that'll be a big part of my ambassadorship when I'm going across the country. Cuéntame, which is the platform, a big part of it is helping kids book talk books to each other and to me. And I'll be book talking to them, they're going to be book talking to me, it's going to be fun. But the whole notion of reading and loving books and talking to each other about books, because I think when I meet someone and I say, you've got to read Beatriz Explains It All, and this is why, because, and I give you the whole thing, I'm telling you about Beatriz Explains It All, but I'm also telling you about me, right? And I'm trying to find the things about me that will connect with you, and that's how books connect us, right? That's one way. So I think that's really essential. A lot of writing, but also read. And next on my thing, I just finished a manuscript. Literally, it is in my car right now. I printed it out. Now it's a mess, right? Now I have to go back and read it and just cringe and all the things. But it's a fantasy. I haven't written fantasy in many years, and it's set in the abyss, in the deep ocean. Everyone's dead. So, you know, it could go really poorly. I'll let you know if I pull it off. But I wanted to write something really different, right? I had written contemporary realism. I know I can do that. I was really satisfied with it. And I followed my own stupid advice, which is I say to people, experiment. See what you can do, scare yourself. And then the problem is, then you're really scared, right? You're writing it and you're going, I don't think I can do this. I don't have the chops for this. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. But exciting is that, remember, if you follow my work, you know Yaki Delgado wants to kick your ass from 2013. Look what's coming out as a graphic novel in September. This book is 10 years old, which is weird to me. The novel is 10 years old, and Mel Vargas Valentine is the person who adapted the novel to graphic novel format, and they did a great job, and I'm very proud of it, and I know for a fact that I'm going to take a lot of heat for this book, because of the title that continues to be, especially in this book banning climate, many people will react only to the title and not to what's inside. And so I encourage you all, in whatever format you like. If you like graphic novels, this is coming in September. If you want it in novel format, of course it's available, but it's what's in the book. It's what's inside this, and that's it.
So earlier, both of you alluded to the effects of the pandemic on learning and on students and their ability to form relationships. I was just wondering, what do you think is the future for literature revolving around students in middle school and high school and so forth, and how we incorporate that period of time? It was a 2-year period. How we incorporate that into our storytelling, and how do we tell stories with that in mind in the background?
Well, you know, it's funny because when I had my book come out last year, and then I have a book coming out this year. And in both cases, those were conversations I had with my editor. It's like, do we set this pre-pandemic or like sometime in the far future? And the consensus, at least for my team at Random House, was let's just do it before the pandemic. And so I think we haven't seen too many books. I think the feeling is, unless it's a pandemic book, like Kelly Yang has some, right, that are like focused on that, but unless it's that, we're kind of skirting around it currently in publishing. So I don't know how that will change in the coming years. Definitely in my case, I've been encouraged to set my books kind of before. It's tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. I say that part of what we do when we write for children is that we write their life, right? We write what they're experiencing and what it has been to grow up for them. So I just finished a book proposal for my next series of books, not this, but like the next things that I'll be writing after the dead people in the sea. And I am going to really set my roots in that, because I think it has changed children and has changed teaching and changed classrooms and families and all the things. And so if we don't put that to pen, if we don't represent it, if we don't give them a place where they can see it and be able to read it and talk about it with their friends, with their teacher, with their mother, whoever they read with, like, I just feel like they need a place to say, this is what has happened. Even if they don't conceptualize it that way, but this, yeah, like PE with a mask on, or you know, the new protocol for the dance, or whatever it is. We don't have to belabor it. Like, it doesn't have to be about that, but it needs to be how. It needs to be the set, so to speak. I think. I could be wrong.
No, I agree, and I think you're definitely in a better position, I think.
Send me it. bring me to that meeting.
You know, us baby authors are more like, okay, cool, whatever, whatever will make you buy my book. But yes, I'm excited for your series.
Right. I'll add that to Cuéntame. I'll add that to my platform. I just feel like,
yeah,
I understand what you mean.
No, it's, yeah.
Because you're sitting in an editorial meeting and your editors do tell you, well, we don't know, and you're feeling like you want to please them and write what you want to write and all of that, but you'll see. There'll be a moment where you're going to say, there's the line, right? You will. You'll say, this is what matters to me. And I can't predict what it'll be, and neither can you, but there'll be something that you're going to decide, that's the hill I'm going on, right? Like that is
So the books are similar, right? Similar themes, similar, somewhat similar backgrounds, but they're different in form. One is, you know, a novel, and the other one is poetry. So I wanted to, you know, I would love for us to know, like, what are your literary influences, and why did you decide to write, how you write, or how you wrote these books?
Yeah, I have always liked writing poetry. My grandparents were the unfortunate victims of many poems. And they were so sweet. They would frame them sometimes on the walls. They were sweet. Yeah, I loved writing poetry. I did not know that books could be written in poetry until pretty recently. And I think the trajectory was, I was already teaching. I was struggling whenever it came time to those poetry units. And then at some point I discovered spoken word poetry, like on YouTube, became obsessed with it. Not something I would be brave enough to do, I think, but started incorporating it in the classroom. And then soon after, you know, I discovered Elizabeth Acevedo's books, and then other authors like Aida Salazar and Elizabeth Velasquez, and all these Latino women who were out there writing books in verse. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I should try to do that too. And so Ibelis is the first time. Before that, everything in book format that I had tried to write had been in prose. That was the first time that I tried, that I experimented with writing in verse, because I was so inspired by all these authors that I saw doing these really cool things that I wanted to do too. And the other pro for me of writing in verse, you know, as someone who has taught English language learners for a really long time, is that there is a shorter word count. You know, my book may look just as thick as any other book, but obviously, you know, because it's in poems, it's a lot faster to read, it's a lot shorter. The audiobooks are also very short. And so I just think it makes it a lot more accessible for students, not just English language learners, but students who it may take them longer to get through a book, or they may be put off by the difficulty of trying to sound out, you know, certain words. And so I definitely write my books so that they're easy to read as well, and not just poetic.
It also mainlines the emotion. Like,
Yeah.
it, you know, it just mainlines the image and the emotion. And I think for kids who struggle with reading, they can feel successful with a novel in verse. I can't write them, so I applaud you. I have tried. I'm wordy. I love description. I love all that stuff. So it's not the right form for me, but I so admire novels in verse for all of those things. And I think in every class library and in every home library and school library, there's room for both of those things, because you're going to have all kinds of readers, right? You're going to have the reader who wants that emotional impact, who needs perhaps more white space and all of that. And then you have the reader who wants to just squirrel away in a chair and read for a long time. You know, the kids who like come in with the big fat books and want to tell you how many pages is in it because they read that book, and you know, they all exist there.
I think one of the best things I've seen with my own book is someone sent me a picture of their kid who had drawn, like they love to draw, and because there was so much white space in my book, the book does have a few illustrations in it because it's meant to look like Ibelis's diary, and they not only colored in those illustrations, but then added some more to other poems. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that there's space for that in the book, you know, and they can add stuff.
They should print one like that. You know, like with the room for all of those things. But yeah, I think novels in verse, as with graphic novels, are a good option, especially now, and especially with, in situations where kids have been out of school for a while and they may have some deficits in reading and all of that stuff. It's a good segue, you know, if there's going to be a segue, there's a good segue.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm a huge believer that graphic novels are literature. Like, real worthy literature. Before we get into audience-centric questions, I have a two-parter, and we'll start with Meg. Who do you write for? And what is the most important thing you want readers to get from the book?
So I write for the girl that I was. I write to answer the questions that she had and that she could not ask. And when I finish writing for her, I ask myself, how does this meet a girl now in 2023? Right, that's the whole process. And what I want them to get out of it is their own relationship with it, honestly. I think the magic that happens for kids in reading is in this, like, in that quiet moment, like when it's them in the page and the story, and they're asking themselves, like, who am I in the story? Like, what would I do differently? Or like those moments where you go, oh, Yalice, or mercy, what a stupid thing you did, or like whatever, like that reflection on how people behave and how people react to life, I think informs them. And it informs, it gives them tools. It gives them a safe way to practice living. So I can't say what I want them to get out of anything except that urgent need for them to be able to connect their life with the lives of the people that I'm writing.
Same question. Who do you write for, and what would you like your readers to get out of the book?
Yeah, I think very similar to what Meg said. It's that combination of, writing for my ex-students, my ex-foster kids, and then also for myself. But I think what I really want is like twofold in my books. For kids who have experienced the things that those main characters have been through, to feel themselves seen and understood, but then also for kids who haven't, so that they can be more empathetic with their classmates who may be going through similar things. Because I think sometimes both kids and adults don't know necessarily how to be empathetic and how to have conversations about things that they haven't experienced. And if they don't see that modeled somewhere, they're not going to just learn it from osmosis. And so allowing kids, both the kids who see themselves and the kids who don't, access to sort of kids who are going through those things and what their inner thoughts are.
Perfect, thank you. Are there any questions that folks would like to ask?
We've stunned them.
So you mentioned about doing book talks. Could you give us a couple of your favorite books that you've read in the last year that you would recommend to us?
Yes, aside from maybe Lisa explains it all. Okay, here's a little book talk for a chapter book called Elena Rides or Elena Monta Bici. And so it's a book that you can flip. On one side you can read it in Espanol, on the other side you can read it in English. And so Elena is an elephant, I think, trying to ride a bike. And is learning to ride a bike and is finding it rather challenging. And it's fantastic because it's a chapter book, right? It's just simple words. Elena tiene una bici. Elena has a bike. You know, simple words that kids are sounding out. And then the falls are really hilarious because we fall in different languages. In English, you fall and you go splat, you go bam, you go ouchie. In Spanish, you fall and you go cataplum. And so I think it's really fun. Like, how do you fall in Spanish? How do you like food in Spanish? Wouldn't that be fun in an ESL classroom? Like, what are all the sounds of, how we say in this, that, and the other thing. So that's an example of how I would book talk. So the thing is, like, enthusiasm, and not in this book, there is a, you know, not like a report on the book, but the hook of the book. Like, what was the moment that made you laugh, or that makes you keep thinking about the book? And they're quick. They have to be between like 30 seconds and a minute. That's the challenge that I'm putting to kids. You've got a minute to convince me this is a fabulous book. Go. But I give them some time. They have a few weeks before I arrive. And then they can pick the book and design and so on. But I think, I learned book talking from wonderful librarians. The best book talkers are the people at CCBC and at the University of Wisconsin, the Cooperative Center for Children's Books. And those librarians, I went to a ceremony there in Wisconsin, and where they book talk all the winners, right? And the honorees. I left that conference like this. I was with all these books because they talked me into them. I was such an enthusiast. But it was that. It was how they talked about the books that I was like, of course I need that book. Of course I want to read it. So I don't know. I think it's enthusiasm and love and just connection.
Andrea, would you like to?
Oh, well, I don't know if I can attempt a book talk like that.
You can.
But I will say a middle grade I read recently that I loved is called Sincerely Cicely. It came out in January. It's the debut novel. And it's about a girl who is Black and Panamanian, which not a lot of kids in her class understand. And what I loved about it is she goes on her own research journey. Like, if you want to model for kids how to look up information online and like extrapolate facts and like do your own research, it's a great one, because you basically go on the journey with Cicely as she's finding out about like her family heritage and how to then explain that to her classmates. And there's also like a first crush and problems with grandma who doesn't like her hairstyles. There's a lot going on, but the research part really intrigued me, because I think that's something that a lot of middle schoolers struggle with. How to find information, how to know what information is true and valuable. And so to see that in a book, to see a kid doing her own research, I thought was really, really cool.
You know what else? I think the other thing that would be great about that is that NCTE, the National Council for Teachers of English, just put out this really great position statement on the need to pair nonfiction and fiction in classrooms. So imagine a unit, right, on not only, maybe on Panama, but also on how you do research and how genealogy and blah, blah, blah. And you could have,
this would be a perfect
like, all that stuff plus this piece of fiction. And then the readers who love facts and want to know can attach that way. The people who like fiction, the list. Cicely reads?
Sincerely Cicely.
Sincerely Cicely.
The author is Tamika Burgess.
Okay. All right.
We have time for one more question.
This is for Andrea. When writing a novel in verse, how did you plot it out so the narrative arc still worked?
I don't think I've figured that out quite yet. I don't think I have a good method yet. I kind of still plot it out because I am a plotter. I do like to kind of plot out my whole books before I write them out. And I do still kind of do it by chapters with like a paragraph doing the chapter summary, which is not a great way because my books are not in chapters. But at least that way I can kind of have the story in order and like what's going to happen. But I don't know. I still haven't found a great way, honestly, for poetry to plot it out.
Do a great job.
Thanks. So I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go at this point.
Well, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.